Hey traders, welcome back to the FXE YouTube channel. I hope everyone is having a good weekend. In this video, I'll do a top-down analysis of DXY and EU and then analyze those markets to give some ideas where price may want to go next week, as well as include some trading ideas for Monday. So let's get into the charts and have a look in more detail. Starting with the fundamentals. If you watch my previous videos, you know how much I was anticipating the ECB interest rate hikes and the potential impacts it may have on EU. This started to get priced in on Wednesday with a strong push to the upside, and then after the announcement we saw continuation at the end of the week. So we can expect short-term strength for the euro. So let's have a look at the rest of the week for news. On Tuesday we have CPI for the dollar, so potential price movement there. And then on Wednesday we have PPI for the dollar as well. And then what do we have on Thursday? So on Thursday we have retail sales. We also have unemployment claims as well. And then on Friday, consumer sentiment. Not sure if this is going to cause much movement and volatility in the market. So we do have a few events earlier in the week where we can see some potential volatility in the markets, but aside from that I don't really see so much. There could be some other events for Europe on my FX book, but on Forex Factory we're not seeing anything here. So let's move on to DXY next, and I am going to start quickly with the yearly time frame. The reason why I wanted to start with the yearly is because we did tap into yearly supply, and as you can see we already had some reaction off of it. Now going to the 6 month. So on the 6 month you can see we've been driving to the upside. We also tapped into 6 month supply. We started to feel this imbalance here, but we didn't clear it yet, and since then started to have somewhat of a pullback. And then on the 3 month, so 3 month is slightly different. So on the 3 month, you can see that we swept supply, and then after sweeping supply we started to have a reaction. And let's move to the monthly next. So on the monthly, what do we have on the monthly? So you can also see that we swept supply on the monthly time frame as well, so we can see the liquidity that was built here that was swept. Did we clear the monthly imbalance? High 786, low 880. So we nearly cleared the monthly imbalance. We missed it by a couple pips, but came very close to it. And then as you can see on the monthly time frame, we're already starting to have a massive pullback on that last candle. And then you could also see that we also didn't tap into the supply range either, or the monthly supply at the extreme. So there is potentially room to continue further to the upside at a later stage. Let's go to the weekly. The weekly is where it starts to get a little more interesting. So on the weekly level, you can see that we broke structure to the upside. We're starting to have a pullback now, and assuming that this weekly structure is respected, then we may see EU come down for a bigger pullback into weekly supply before reversing and continuing to the upside. And looking at this time frame, we finally start to get an idea of possible direction, whereas the higher time frames, all you can see is just bullish candles. But this one, we're starting to see this pullback, which gives us some indication where price may want to go next. So after taking out the highs, we can expect a pullback. The pullback appears to have already started, and hopefully we get some short-term bearishness on DXY. Like I said, I'd like price to come into demand, which coincides with the weekly OTE level, before it reverses and pushes back up and goes for the highs again. Now let's go to the daily time frame. So although we start to get a picture of where price may want to go from the weekly, I'll try to focus more on the daily and the 4 hour, as it will give more clues that can help us for trading next week. So first, you can see that we broke the highs. We started to come down. We broke the demand below, which starts to give an indication that it'll probably come down a little lower. There's a clear shift of order flow now, and it's likely that we've started this pullback and it will continue further to the downside. But as such, I would expect that we can see a pullback before pushing down further. So I've already marked on my chart my expectation. So I would like to see price come back up into supply. To where it goes, I mean, that's a completely different question, but somewhere in supply, we have a daily OTE level here, which could be a possible area for price to come to before reversing and continuing further to the downside. And price doesn't necessarily have to go back to the supply before reversing, but it seems like an obvious area to target, especially as we already started to show a pullback, and you can see that we have OT area as well as supply coinciding as a potential nice area to look for reversals. And assuming we get a reversal, pushing the price back down, our downside targets would be the weekly demand. Sorry, typo here. I don't know if you guys notice, but I often confuse demand and supply when I'm doing my videos. Sometimes I'll say, price will go into demand when it's a supply, or price will go into supply when it's a demand. Anyways, bear with me. So very short term, I'm bullish, so I would like to see price have a pullback back into supply, but keeping the short term bearish bias to see price push down at least to the weekly demand level, which is here, the daily demand level, which is here, This, I believe, is a weekly OTE area. Wow, sorry about that. So we have our weekly OTE area here. Our daily OT level may have already been tapped, actually, because if we use the last leg on the daily, it just went below the OT level and started to pull back. So even more confluence. So price pulled back into OT level, coming back up, or reacting off of it, coming back up into supply, and then pushing down further, which I would like to see. Can't remember if I already mentioned it, but once price does start to go into the demand levels, so the weekly demand OT levels, whether it's here, here, or here, start to look for a shift, and then thereafter look for price to push to the upside, ultimately breaking this high. Okay, so anyways, let's continue on to the 4-hour time frame. So you start to see a different picture on the 4-hour time frame. You can clearly see now that order flow has shifted to the downside when we broke this demand, which was the last structure point that broke the highs. So clearly a change of character now, and after breaking that demand, we had a pullback which tapped into the OT level of this leg, and thereafter continued to the downside. So we're currently here in this demand, and we reacted off of it. You can clearly see that we started to initiate a pullback to the upside. We've been consolidating, actually most in New York session from what I remember, in this area. And the way I look at it now, it looks like it's building liquidity to continue to push to the upside. So as with the daily, I'd like to see a bigger pullback before continuing to push the price down lower. I've marked the supply as well as the OT areas that we can hopefully look for reversals. So we have our 4-hour OT level as well as our daily OT level. In case you're wondering why the daily OT level and the 4-hour OT level is different, it's because they're based on different price points. So the daily structure covers the retracement from this high to this low, whereas the 4-hour retracement level only covers the leg from this high to this low. And because of that, their retracement levels will obviously be a little different. So anyways, come Monday, if I start to see DXY push up, then I'll be looking for shorts on EU. The bias that I explained during the daily time frame is consistent with the 4-hour time frame, but targets should be a little clearer and more detailed on this time frame. Just want to quickly look. Yeah, so our downside targets are going to be somewhere in this area, is what I'm looking at. So push to the upside into supply, whether it's the 4-hour OTE or the daily OTE, or just in the supply. And then after that we start to see a shift, and then price comes pushing to the downside, where my targets will be below the weekly demand and preferably within or at minimum the OT level. And here we could start to see a shift before price starts pushing to the upside, ultimately breaking this high, which would make the most sense structurally, at least for now. Anyways, let me move on to EU and show you what I'm seeing there next. So I'm going to skip the higher time frames, like the monthly time frames, yearly time frames, as nothing's really changed. I mean, it's just bullish candles for the time being. So I'll go directly to the weekly, and from the weekly you can see we broke structure again to the downside. We consolidated for a couple weeks before having that last spring, before pushing the price to the upside. So you can see that we're breaking these candles, starting to see signs of a shift on the weekly, and we can imagine price continuing to the upside, potentially clearing the weekly imbalance, coming up into weekly supply, potentially the weekly OTE area, before reversing and coming right back down to target the lows. Let me just mark that really quick. Okay, so now let me move on to the daily. So starts to become a little clearer on the daily, what's been happening. So you can see we had all this accumulation at the lows. Then we started to show some signs of strength, and thereafter pushing back down, breaking these lows, using the lows as inducement, which ultimately can be seen as a spring before shooting to the upside. And then thereafter they had a clear pullback, which actually went right back into the OTE level, and then continuation to the upside. And in the process of the continuation to the upside, we've actually created a daily chalk, so we can expect a pullback after the creation of the chalk, before continuing further to the upside. So now let's move on to the 4-hour time frame. So on the 4-hour time frame, so I won't go too detailed into the previous price action, but looking at what's happened recently, so we had that last aggressive push to the upside. It tapped into 1-hour supply. Thereafter we started to see a reaction off of it, and then price started to push back down to the downside. You can already start to see the shift, and like to see continuation further to the downside, There's nothing really to the left giving any indication that it could reverse from here. There actually was somewhere up here. There's like a 5-minute zone, but that's already been broken. And if you were on the charts Friday, depending on where you are, afternoon or in the evening, you could see that, I mean, it was just a complete mess. It was just ranging in this area, and my expectation is that is probably redistribution before continuing and pushing further to the downside. Assuming it wants to come back down into this demand levels, it would also clear 4-hour imbalance, as well as reach OT levels. And here is where I would start to look for a shift before price starts to reverse and push back to the upside. I would like to see the next wave reach the next supply area, which would be up here. The supply level or the supply zone above where we previously were is actually a really nice area, because it would also coincide with the weekly supply zone, as well as reach weekly OT levels. So I could imagine we get into this area, potentially reverse from there or have a pullback, and maybe even go deeper into weekly supply. So weekly supply is this entire area here. So as I said, reaction and potential reverse from this area, or pullback and then continuation deeper into weekly supply before we start to have a shift in reversal, bringing the price down to target the lows. So anyways, that's more or less what I'm looking at for the weekly analysis. But from this week on, what I said to one of the viewers who obviously knew I wasn't doing daily videos on Mondays and sometimes Tuesdays, he wanted to see the lower time frames for trade ideas on Monday. So from this week on, I'll also include a quick analysis for short-term ideas for Monday. So on the 15-minute time frame, what I would like to see, I've already marked the path of what makes the most sense for me for the time being. I would like to see if we get a pullback. At the end of the trading week, you can see we had one push to the upside, which ended with an aggressive push to the downside. So at this point, I'm not sure how much of a pullback we will get, because this could have been the last retest before it starts to melt down. But assuming we do get a pullback come Monday morning, then I would like to see either a retest of the previous supply area, the one above or the one above that, before looking for shorts to take the price down to the demand levels. So like as I was saying, I've already marked what I'd like to see, but like I said, this could go here. It could also break the highs as well, use it as inducement before it starts to shift and push down. Don't really see much of a reason for price reversing and pushing up from here. It is always a possibility, and if I see this scenario, I probably won't trade it. Wait till we have confirmation and then look for a pullback before entering any longs. But the reason why I don't see it is, I mean, I mentioned it before, but we had a 5-minute demand area here, and even this wick here, which could have been considered as areas to look for reversals, but as you can see, it went right through it, and then it has been consolidating in this range. So my guess is this is redistribution, building orders to take the price further to the downside. And my downside targets for Monday, because I think it's very likely we'll see this on Monday if we do see a push to the downside. This line, which I don't remember what it was. Here, 4-hour imbalance. So targeting the 4-hour imbalance, which coincides with the 4-hour demand, as well as the OT area. But it could also come down even further to the extreme before we start to see that shift and reversal and push back up to the upside. So just to sum up quickly, my bias is clearly bullish for EU now. Short term, I am bearish. I would like to see a bigger pullback before it continues to push to the upside. And if we are able to reach the weekly supply levels that I mentioned above this line, it would be the area that I would start to look for reversals. This is where I would like to see a shift, a realignment with the higher time frames, and then ultimately reversing to bring the price back down to the downside. This is also where I would switch my bias back to long-term bearish to go and target the lows. Doesn't necessarily mean that EU has to stop at those at the weekly supply. Let me go back to the weekly so you can see a little clearer. So here's a weekly supply level that I'm expecting price to ultimately come up to before reversing. But honestly speaking, it doesn't have to stop there. I mean, there is potential for this push up to go up and break the weekly supply. And if that happens, then I mean we would see a daily break of structure, which would also be the start of something much bigger, where we can expect more long-term reversals. But let's give it some time for that scenario to happen, as right now is much less likely. Much less likely of a scenario to happen for now. So let's just give it some time. Let's see how price action plays out, and if it does happen to break this level, then obviously we readjust and build our coming analysis based on that. Okay, well anyways, that sums up my weekly outlook, as well as my Monday analysis. Hopefully you guys found it useful. I would really like to know your thoughts on the coming week's price action, and you can do that by leaving a comment below. And as a reminder, if you found value in this video, please be sure to click the like button and subscribe to ensure you don't miss any future videos. And enjoy the rest of the weekend, and looking forward to seeing you for the next one on Tuesday or Wednesday. Speak to you guys soon. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the very end. Thanks for that. If you could do me one more favor and click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, it'll allow the YouTube algos to kick in and help this channel grow. Thanks again. Cheers.